All right, what to do if you need help learning about a function or anything else that you don't understand in R. There are a few ways you can go about this. If you go down to the Help tab in the bottom right-hand corner, you will see a whole bunch of R resources that you can use. Manuals, support, online, all of this that can help you. If you have a specific function that you want to get help with, you can type it into the search panel up here, and results for this will appear below that you can look at if you need help. There are a few other ways you can do this. We can also, let's say we want to learn about vectors. We can type help and then vector, and if we run that line of code in the Help tab, a whole bunch of information about vectors will appear. Let's say we want to learn about the sum function. There's a third way that you can get help. Instead of typing help or clicking in the search bar, simply type a question mark and then the word sum. If you run that, you will get a whole bunch of information about the sum function. These are a few quick and easy ways that you can get lots of information about whatever it is you need to know for whatever functions or packages you are running in your code. So now that we know how to create variables and vectors, and we know how to find help about those variables, vectors, and functions if we need it, let's start actually working with text. Let's start with defining a vector using the first sentence of Moby Dick. We're going to call this Moby Dick, our assignment operator, and then we're going to say, call me Ishmael. If we run that, we now have a character vector with the words call me Ishmael inside of it. Now, if you want to use words, you have to make sure that they are in quotation marks, because that is the way R recognizes characters or words as opposed to numbers. If you want to inspect this, you can type the variable name, run it, and you will see the variable output appear in the console. Keep in mind, you can also find the variable in your global environment. Let's try using a couple different functions to mess around with what to do in our variables. The first function we will try is called the class function. This will tell us what kind of data we are storing in our vector or variable. So let's try class, and then in parentheses, we're going to tell the code what we want to find the class of. So first, let's try Moby Dick. If we run this, our class of Moby Dick is character, or words, essentially. Let's try looking at the class of one of the variables we created in a previous video. Let's try the class of our favorite number. If we run this, the class tells us it's numeric, which means we're looking at numbers in that variable. This is important when we're working with different data sets that may contain different types of data and will not work together. Another function you can use is called the length function. This will tell us how long the data set is that we're looking at, which is helpful when we're looking at large texts. The way we can do this is saying, let's look at the length of Moby Dick. This gives us the length 1 because call me Ishmael is all in one word. Let's try doing something called tokenization, where we expand our variable a little farther. So we're going to call this Moby Dick by words. And instead of saying call me Ishmael all together, we're going to use our C function from a previous video, and each word is going to get its own parentheses, and each word is going to be separated by a comma. So now if we look at this line of code, we are saying combine the word call, the word me, and the word Ishmael into one vector called Moby Dick by words. If we run this, we will see that it looks a little different than Moby Dick. And then if we are to check the length of this, it tells us the length is 3. Let's look at why. Let's just call our Moby Dick by words, but we're going to use a new function. We're going to use the function view. And we're going to say we want to look at Moby Dick by words. If we run this, it will appear up here next to our script, and we can see that the word call, the word me, and the word Ishmael are in 3 different rows within the same column. This column is vector 1, and it has 3 different words within it. If we use the same view to look at just Moby Dick, we can see the difference. Call me Ishmael is all on the same line. The difference between these two is what the length function is telling us. There are 3 rows here as opposed to 1 row here. We can see 3 and we can see 1. Another helpful function is the unique function. So if we type unique and then say we want to look at Moby Dick by words and run that, it will tell us what parts of that variable are unique. And we can see that call, me, and Ishmael are all different from each other, so they are all going to be unique. The next thing we can do is something called nesting functions. So let's say we want to know how many unique elements are in my vector. So the first thing we're going to do is type length, and then we're going to type unique, and then Moby Dick by words. This will move from the inside out. So first, we will look at the unique parts of Moby Dick by words, and then going out one more step, we will look at the length of that answer. If we run this, we will get an answer of 3. That's because our unique function gave us call, me, and Ishmael, and then the length of this answer is 3. Nested functions are especially helpful when you start writing long code and you want to run a bunch of operations all at once. Another function that is helpful is the sort function. If we sort Moby Dick by words, we can see that now instead of call me Ishmael, we have call Ishmael me. In this way, we have a C, then an I, then an M, so our sort function went alphabetically. Another awesome thing that we can do is called indexing, or looking for a specific part of your variable. So let's say I want to look at the second part of our Moby Dick by words variable. I can say Moby Dick by words, and then using square brackets, I can say I want to look at the second part of this. If I run this code, it will give me the second element in my vector, which is me. I can also take the vector I made in the last video, myVec, and let's say I want to look at the 4th element in there. If I run that, it will give me the number 9, because as you can see before, we had 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and number 9 is in the 4th position. Now, let's say we don't know what number a word is in the position of, but we do know we want to look for a specific word. Let's say I want to find the word Ishmael in my vector, but I don't know which position it's in. I can use the function which, and then I want to tell it where I'm looking, so I want to look in the Moby Dick by words vector, and then I'm going to use a double equal to sign, which means which part of Moby Dick by words is exactly. The double equal sign means is exactly, so it's going to look for specifically whatever I type next, and then I'm going to type Ishmael. So now my code is looking in Moby Dick by words for exactly Ishmael. If I run this, I'm going to get the answer of 3, and that's because Ishmael is in the 3rd position in my Moby Dick by words. Now, let's say I want to create new vectors based on other parts of vectors that are already created. Let's say I want to use a vector to create a variable with the first word of Moby Dick. So I'm going to say my Moby Dick first word is assigned whatever the first position is in Moby Dick by words. When I do this, my first word becomes call. So now I am indexing into Moby Dick by words to find the first word and create a new variable. I can also do multiple words, so I can say Moby Dick first 3 is Moby Dick by words, and then I'm going to say 1, and then I'm going to use the colon to say through 3. If I run this, my Moby Dick for 3 is Call Me Ishmael. I can run the same code again. First 2, Moby Dick by words, and I can say 1 through 2, and that will give me Call Me. This is all called indexing, and it can be super helpful when you're looking through large texts. Great! We have come to the end of this chapter, and by now you should have learned how to use math operations, define variables, use variables to create other variables, define vectors using the C function, use other functions to manipulate those vectors, and use vectors to create more variables or vectors. Remember, you can always use the help function if you need it to learn more about any of the processes we just described. We'll see you in the next chapter.